Hi, my name is Eric Reynolds. I'm the Vice President and Associate Publisher of Fantagraphics Books, and it's my pleasure to be here talking to Briana Loewinsohn, a cartoonist from Oakland, California, who has now created two graphic novels for Fantagraphics, the second of which, Raised by Ghosts, is coming out this winter 2025. And it comes on the heels of her acclaimed debut graphic novel, Ephemera, a memoir, which came out in, I want to say, the spring of 2023, spring, summer of
You got it.
2023.
Yeah.
Um, Hi, Brianna.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Great.
Um, why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and, how you kind of came to be a cartoonist and graphic novelist with two graphic novels out within the span of, a couple of years.
I'd love to. So I got into comics sort of from birth a little bit, I would say. I grew up in Berkeley. I was born at home to like some real wild hippies. And so instead, my parents were like not interested in reading me kids' books, so they read me a lot of comics instead. So as a kid, I was read Charles Adams and Calvin and Hobbes and Life in Hell and Edward Gorey and Linda Berry and, R. Crumb, all this real wild stuff. And we just had lots of books in our house that we could peruse at any time, like collections of Mad magazines, things like that. So because I had all that around, I was just really sort of used to the format of comics. And then I got really into drawing as a child, and I ended up studying art in college. And in school, my professors would always tell me my art was too narrative. And I was like, what does narrative mean? But then I realized it was storytelling, and I was like, well, I might as well just really go for it and make my professors mad. So I started making comic books as my projects in college. And I just really loved it. I was sort of felt like, oh, this is what really speaks to me. And I finally found a medium that really is like the thing I want to do. So I started making comics in late 90s, early 2000s, and just made mini comics, really starting then, which are now called zines, I feel like. And I would draw these comics and take them to bookstores and ask the bookstores to give me 50 cents or anything that they could to sell my little books. And I slowly built up a community. It started out that I would draw with my one friend, Jacob, who's a main character in Raised by Ghosts. He and I would draw together a lot. And then I found other cartoonists and really built up this community to go to like conventions and sell books there. And then finally, then I took a break because I had kids, and I was like, oh, I cannot. I'm a high school teacher, so I could not teach full-time high school, have two kids, and make these silly comics.
Yeah,
Um,
that'll do
yeah. So I took a little
it.
break. And then in the pandemic actually is what gave me the time to draw. So we were teaching remotely, sort of like how we are on Zoom. I would give my lesson and then let the kids go work. And my really, really good friend, Tin Pham, who's also a cartoonist, we teach at the same high school. And so we would teach our lessons, we would let the kids work. And while the kids were working, we would work. We decided to write our first, or my first big, long graphic novel. And he was working on a graphic novel too. And that really gave me the time to work and the discipline that just every day when I wasn't instructing, I was drawing this book. And I sent it off to you, and you were like, yeah, I want to print that. Um, and then I felt so just so happy in this published world and community. And I love doing events so much. And I was like, I want another book to come out. And I've always wanted to tell the story about high school. So so I started working on that right away.
Um, you mentioned you teach art,
Mhm.
and you also mentioned that, as a student, you were basically told a lot of the same things that a lot of kids of our generation or generations before were told, which was that comics, weren't art.
Yeah.
Anything drawn in a kind of cartooning idiom or was too representational.
Yeah.
uh, was not valid. And now here you are teaching art at a high school, right?
Yep. High school.
Um, with 10, and
Mhm.
you've also had other cartoonists that
Yeah. Gene Yang taught with us for a long time, who's
Yin
also a
Yang, like
pretty big
it's
cartoonist.
yeah, I mean that's pretty remarkable, like how much the world has turned to where now, you're I'm sure encouraging comics and
Yeah,
cartoons.
absolutely. Yeah, I teach one of the classes I teach is AP art, and so a lot of the kids, or not a lot, but as you know, a percentage of kids really love comics and video game art and stuff like that. So it's a really great format because they get to work on a portfolio of whatever they're interested in, and I just get to sort of like push them to do the thing that they want to do, which is something that I feel like maybe I was one of the last generations of like, no, that's not real art.
Mhm.
I think now
I would
it's
say
much
so,
more
yeah.
accepted. Yeah, to sort of be able to do any kind of art and make it valid.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, let's talk about these two books. Primarily, I want to focus on Raised by Ghosts,
let's do it.
um, but also Ephemera as well. Um, because I think they kind of converge and diverge in
Mhm,
interesting ways. Um, both are autobiographical to some degree, whether
mhm,
explicitly or not. And
mhm,
yet one's billed as a memoir, one
mhm,
isn't.
mhm,
One's, I think, what I would qualify as more of an adult graphic novel that has a lot of potential crossover, I think, to curious teens.
mhm,
And then the other one's like I think a little more squarely aimed at teens, but I think
mhm,
has a lot of crossover to adults, like myself. I mean, as I've told you, I mean, I've probably read the book, what, a half a dozen times,
mhm.
and I absolutely love it. And I think it gets better every time I read it. Um, and it hits me in a way as an adult, I think, that is interesting and maybe different than it would, a teen that's coming into it and identifying with it. So anyway, that's barely a question, but how did you approach both books, similarly or differently in terms of autobiography or
Yeah.
who you were creating them for to be read by?
Right. No, I hear what you're saying. I had always, all my mini comics up to through Ephemera had been geared to whatever age I was and what I felt like. So my very early comics were sort of like geared towards maybe an early 20s aesthetic. And then it just sort of like I just wrote to myself basically. So when I wanted to write Ephemera, which I would call a memoir more, and I would call Raised by Ghosts more autobio.
Ah,
Ephemera doesn't, they're set in the same location in my mind, but Ephemera doesn't look at all like where I grew up, and it doesn't look like me, and it doesn't look like my mom, and it's sort of set in this
yeah.
dreamy, ambiguous landscape. Um, and the reason I did that was a couple of reasons. Was I really was more interested in processing my mother's death and processing the feelings that I had, as opposed to a likeness of what things looked like. That wasn't really a need for the book. That it was more like, how can I portray the feeling of being this person's daughter and what it felt like to connect with her. Um, and I was totally interested in it being an adult book. I do think that people read up. So I think that,
Yeah, right.
right. So I had an adorable student today come up and get her ephemera signed in class, which was
Uh-huh.
really cute. So I do think that like teenagers can resonate with it. Um, and then after I finished that, I was so compelled to write this book about high school in the 90s, and the theme of writing notes was just really captivating to me. And we used to those who don't know what that is, we used to, when you're bored in class, you would write a note, you would fold it up, and then you would give it to your friend, and then they would get the note right back. And it was, and we didn't have texting. So that was like how we stayed in touch and how we dealt with being bored and how we dealt with all of our feelings. And so I felt really compelled to write this, but I really wanted to try YA. I had never really done it. And I felt like if I did it as an adult book, I felt like I would have to tackle some issues that I wasn't particularly interested in covering. Like it might have to be more adult. Um, and I also was really more excited to show what it felt like to live in the 90s and what my room felt like and what the classroom smelled like. Like I really wanted to like I was much more interested in the likeness. And to me, that is why it feels more autobio versus memoir of like of ephemera.
Yeah, it's interesting distinction. I wouldn't have necessarily thought of that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's correct. That's just how I think of it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me actually. And it's funny that like the what you were saying about ephemera, there's a ghostliness to it that's more kind of lyrical or poetic
Mhm.
or what have you. And then in Raised by Ghosts, it's a bit, forgive me, I keep almost saying Raised by Wolves.
Well, I almost called it that. So I always joke that I was by wolves and I have no manners because I was just raised by these hippies who didn't know anything. I don't know what happened. They decided to reject their childhood. So therefore they were like, we won't teach you anything. So I'm always like, I'm sorry, I was raised by wolves. And then I felt like that wasn't the right sentiment. And they were
Yeah,
so absent. So I felt
yeah.
like Raised by Ghosts really encapsulated that for me. So
That's
it's
that's
fine.
that's funny because the ghost is perfect and um it's sort of implied by the title, if not, I don't think you ever necessarily say it explicitly in young Brianna's, you know,
Right.
movies. Um, but that ghostliness like kind of permeates both books. It's the interest in depicting the 90s is one of the things that I loved when you first, kind of pitched it to me.
Mhm.
Um, because I'm a little bit older than you, but I still, I think we have a lot of similar kind of reference
Yeah.
points.
You lived through it.
Um, yeah, and it's clear that you really had fun doing that. I mean,
Yeah.
the book's packed with the, the old Will Elder chicken fat phrase where you,
No.
it's Will Elder, the Mad Magazine
Yeah, yeah,
cartoonist.
yeah.
Um, if, the way that he packs so much visual
Oh,
gag
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. Yeah.
everything, he
Just a
called
little
it.
Easter eggs.
Yeah, he called it the
Yeah.
chicken fat, and this
Okay.
book's kind of filled with that, I think.
Yeah. It's got some
Whether
schmaltz.
it's those you did those amazing end papers of
Mm.
Brianna's walls and bulletin boards and then the kind of list making stuff in the back is really
Hmm.
cool. Um, so what was that like? I think it's also it's interesting that what you said earlier about how this was the first book that you really weren't writing for yourself at the age
Yeah.
you were at when writing it.
Yeah, that's
So
true. Yeah.
how
Yeah.
how was that different? Like what kind of feels did that, kind of fill you with at the
Yeah. And
time?
I hadn't thought about that. I think that I guess I was writing this book more to 15-year-old Brianna.
Mhm.
I really approach all my work with, do I love it? Like that's just how I go about my work. It's, every time I finish a page, I'm like, oh, it's amazing. I just, I just want to amuse myself or like make myself feel something, or if that's how because I don't know what everyone else is thinking and I can't, I don't want to worry about pleasing people or anything. So I really just was like, what is a book that 15-year-old Brianna would really love to read? And I did a lot of research, which was fun, just in terms of, but not like in a library or the internet, as much as I'm still close to a lot of people I grew up with, and because I still live in the Bay Area, and so we have a million photos, and one of my friends, Jacob, we filmed a lot of stuff, so we actually have a lot of footage.
Hmm.
So it was really fun to and ask someone like, okay, did you have like this in your room when you were a sophomore? And then there were some things that I had to shift around because it wouldn't make sense story-wise. So I would combine certain nights or moments so that the story flow would make more sense. But it was really fun to talk to everyone about it. And then I also saved all of my notes. So I have like 3 garbage bags filled with notes from high school. And reading through those, the first writing that I did for the book was I just went through my notes and I wrote to myself everyone's note style. So it would talk about, Jacob wrote notes like this, Julia wrote notes like this. I would only get notes from Ashkan when we had a fight or whatever it was. I just sort of like gave myself like a list, and that just got me into the mood of a teenager, categorizing and really thinking in terms of that. It was really fun.
How much of the notes did you actually, use verbatim in the book?
There's very little that is verbatim. I don't have my notes that I gave to anyone. I only have notes that
Right.
they gave to me, but I do have one journal which spans freshman to senior year of high school, and it's horrific.
That's what I was going to ask you, because I sort of have the impression that it's a combination of notes and journal.
Yeah, I like that you can't quite tell that it's like,
Yeah.
is this like a private thing she's writing to herself, or is this like to a person? But I'm into ambiguity, and I kind of like that. Um,
So,
yeah.
oh, no, continue. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, one of the things that amused me about this journal is, um, everything feels so real and intense when you're a teenager. And I would literally be like 4 months or something between each entry. So one entry would be sigh, I don't know why this person doesn't like me right now. I think they hate me, da 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 da. And then the next one would be like, God, they're such a jerk. And it would just like total like horrible thoughts. And it's like, well, maybe you're the problem. That really made me laugh with just the absurdity.
So I get the sense that you've well, I should preface this by saying you've even like recommended a couple of YA books for my teenager.
Mhm.
So that's partly why I was going to say it seems to me like you're kind of versed in YA to a degree, whether from being a parent or
Mhm.
teacher of teens or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, what do you think sets this book apart from some of the YA that you're familiar with? And I ask partly because I have a hard time kind of articulating why I think it is, but I absolutely think it is set apart. Like I've read enough myself that um I find this book very moving in a way that, a lot of more traditional YA doesn't, because I'm not the target audience for it.
Yeah. I have a very voracious reader. I have a 12-year-old. And so she just read Dune. I'm not trying to brag, but like what? She's like very into reading. And what I notice with her and my son, who is a great reader but less interested, is that they both kind of want to read something geared for the ages above them. But what a
Mhm.
lot of things that are designated YA, and I don't mean this to slander other books, is that feels young because the kids are reaching for something higher, like higher than their age. Um, and then so I really wanted to like, that's why it's sort of written a little bit more towards an adult like understanding of the world, because I think that a lot of teenagers do want to read. I mean, they're reading very adult books in high school. They're not
Mhm.
reading YA necessarily. So they have the capability to have such deep feelings that I wanted the book to sort of be, ideally, that an adult would be able to understand it and a teenager would be able to understand it. And then market it to teenagers so that they could have that experiences of like, okay, this is like adult perspective on like a teenage time. Um, I was going to
Yeah.
say something else, but I can't remember.
No, that's a good answer. I think that hits the nail on the head, really. Um, for me, reading it, there's the perspective of being a parent, and in addition to remembering what it was like to be
Yeah.
young Brianna's age, and that really like stirs the pot in terms of the the way it affected me. And I'll be real curious to hear how younger readers engage it, because um they're they're not going to have that
Hmm.
benefit of hindsight. They may or may not identify with the specifics of Brianna's home life.
Right.
Um, but I would like to think that on some level, there's something for them to identify with.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
really,
Good.
oh, just that you really do a great job at getting into the kind of interior mind of a high schooler. The kind of loneliness and the unfamiliarity with the world, the no matter how mature you want to be or you think you are, you're still you are still figuring out life,
Yeah.
and anyway, go ahead.
Oh no, I didn't have anything to say. I was like, my book is great. um,
Well,
um,
there's this feeling when you're a teenager, at least there was for me, where um you're so alone in your own head, and you feel like oftentimes everybody else has it figured out
right.
except for you.
Yeah.
And I think once you become an adult and you have kids of your own, it's like you realize like everybody felt that way on some level.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially for me, that was like the middle. So the beginning of the book is in middle school, and that was just fully the middle school experience. Because a lot of times you're going to a new school. Not everyone. Some kids go K-8 or K-12, but or homeschooled or whatever it is. But if you are starting in a new school, you walk in, and it's when you're first becoming aware of other people. You have those feelings of like, suddenly you realize other people can see you. Like your whole childhood, you're just like concerned with looking out. And that's, I think, the first time people start to be like, oh, wait, what are people perceiving of me? And you have no perspective to see that they also don't know what they're doing. So if they're smiling, you don't know if that they know what they're doing. Like, you just have no clue. And I think that that's where it's like, for me, that the most intense with that feeling was that middle school age. And then in high school is when I think the feelings get intense. Like, because you have such intense feelings in high school. And that's when that like loneliness of like, no one will ever understand me. It's
Right,
just
right.
taken
And
over.
despite, your like desire to kind of relive the 90s,
Hmm.
really, like it's timeless stuff. I mean, some of the specifics has changed, whether it's, using cell phones versus notes or,
Right.
but the interpersonal kind of relationships and navigating life stuff hasn't really changed at all, I don't think.
Yeah, and then the teenager, the need
Mm.
for connection. I think, they have so much more connection at a moment's notice than we did. But it's the same need is there. So whether it was we were writing notes and that made you feel connected even though no one was in the room, or you stayed on the phone all night long, or you snuck out of your house, or whatever it was. But there is that teenage need to know other people and to feel like there's something outside of your home that is something you want to have in your life.
Yeah. There's a moment where that in the book where Brianna falls asleep at the phone that I could completely relate to and very much brought me
Mhm.
back.
Did you have those 8-hour phone conversations when you were young?
Yeah, totally. And and it probably started at some point around the beginning of high school where
Mhm.
yeah, I had a phone in my room,
Oof, yeah,
and you could
yeah,
have that privacy. And
yeah. You always wondered if you heard someone pick up the other line and
yes,
listen to what you were
exactly.
saying.
Exactly.